Elijah Freeman never imagined his feet would touch Georgia soil again. Not like this. Shackled, silent, stripped of papers that once proved him free. The wagon creaked through the pine woods. Beside him, other black men stared ahead, hollow-eyed, their chains singing a cruel hymn. Elijah clenched his jaw. He had been a free man. He could read. He had signed contracts. But none of that mattered when the slave catchers came. They said his freedom papers were fake. They laughed when he told them about Philadelphia courts. They beat him when he kept speaking. They threw him in a cell, then sold him south. The plantation was a kingdom of shadows. Colonel Ames owned over 200 souls, and none of them smiled. The fields stretched for miles. The air smelled of blood, sweat, and sugarcane. Elijah was given no name, just a number. 47. His hands bled within hours. His back broke by day 3. Nights were worse. Screams traveled through walls. Prayers whispered in gullah. Chains scraping against wood floors. And in the dark, Elijah remembered things he tried to forget. His mother braiding his sister's hair. The courtroom where he first registered as a free man. Days became weeks. The fields were endless and merciless. Sugarcane sliced open hands like knives. The overseers didn't need reasons to punish. Breathing too loud, stumbling once, answering too slow. All could end with lashes or worse. Elijah learned quickly. Not how to be obedient, but how to disappear. He masked his words, bowed his head, erased the sharpness from his voice. But inside, he wrote every moment into memory. Every name, every bruise. Every grave dug for someone who couldn't last one more day. There was a girl named Lottie, no more than 10, who reminded him of his younger sister. She smiled at him once. A mistake. The next morning, she was gone. No one spoke her name again. He began to count nights by the songs of the old man in the next cabin. Hummed sorrow in the dark. Slave psalms passed down like scripture. Elijah mouthed the words, lips silent. He began to dream, not of escape, but of return, of standing in court, holding up the ragged manumission papers they tore from him, of naming the men who did this, of burning it all down if it meant freedom. One evening, a white preacher visited the plantation. He read from scripture, talking of obedience and heaven's justice. Elijah sat at the back, eyes narrowed. The preacher quoted Ephesians, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters." That night, Elijah scratched his own scripture into the wall with a nail he'd hidden. Freedom is not sin. Truth is not rebellion. He began listening more closely, not just to overseers, but to whispers among the other enslaved. There were rumors about free black men who were captured, about smugglers who bought back freedom, about letters reaching Philadelphia. Elisha waited. He watched Colonel Ames carefully, learned his routines, knew when he drank too much bourbon, knew when the guards changed, knew which hound limped after the rain. And one night, in the stillness of a southern dusk, as cicadas sang and smoke from the cane fields clouded the moon, Elijah whispered to the old man next to him, "I was born free, and I swear I will walk free again." The old man didn't look up, just nodded once. Elijah learned the plantation's rhythm like it was a cruel song. Dawn cries, lashes snapping, Hose striking soil, dusk, silence. But beneath that rhythm was another, quieter, older, a whisper that lived among the trees, between breaths of cotton. It began with a scrap of cloth. One morning, Elijah reached into a burlap sack and felt something soft, almost deliberate. Tucked beneath the cotton was a triangle of blue silk, a fragment torn from a dress, or maybe a kerchief. Too fine to belong here. On its edge was a mark, 3 short lines crossed by 1 long slash, a code. Someone had left it for him. He tucked it into his waistband without looking up. That night, he approached Josiah, an elder whose face bore the maps of decades. Josiah was blind in one eye, but saw more than anyone. Elijah held out the cloth. Josiah sniffed the air. Ain't from here, ain't from Georgia neither. What does it mean? Josiah nodded. Means someone watching, means someone still fighting. The old man took a breath. Boy, did I ever tell you 'bout the rails beneath us? Elijah shook his head. They say there's a path running under the ground. Not real tracks, but real folks, moving people, whisper to whisper, north to north. We call it the railroad. Elijah's heart leapt. Is it real? Josiah grinned, half toothless. Only as real as your will to move. Weeks passed. Elijah began to receive other tokens. A stone wrapped in black string. A corn husk braided like a cross. Always hidden, always coded. He started paying attention, not just to the work, but to the space between it. Miss Cora, the cook, hummed differently on Tuesdays. Isaac, the boy who worked the stables, tapped his boot once when trouble was near. And always, always, there was Ruth. She was the one who never looked afraid. Ruth worked the spinning room, but sometimes helped Cora. She was maybe 19, with eyes that did not bow. Once, Elijah saw her pass a folded note to a man who vanished by sunrise. No one mentioned him again. One evening, Ruth approached him as he drew water. You read, don't you? She whispered. Elijah stiffened. She didn't wait for an answer. There's a map. I'll show you where it begins. But if you hesitate, you'll die. Or worse. What's worse? He asked. She met his eyes. Living here forever. The next night, he met her by the smokehouse. She pulled back a loose board and revealed a jar. Inside, scraps of paper, each marked with symbols, names, paths, a hidden ledger of pain and hope. They think we break easy, she said, tapping her chest. But we carry more inside us than they ever will. Elijah studied the papers. Why me? You're not scared, she said. Or if you are, you don't show it. He thought of the night they chained him, of the courtroom in Philadelphia, of Lottie's empty bed. I'm scared every damn second, he said. But I ain't staying. Ruth nodded. Then listen close. The plan was madness. They would move in 3 nights, during the festival for Colonel Ames' birthday. Drunkenness, distraction, the gate unguarded. Elijah would fake a fall in the cane fields, slipping into the irrigation tunnel. Ruth would steal the master's seal to forge a pass. Josiah would light a signal fire if the overseer left post. Failure meant death, or dismemberment, or the auction block. But it was the only way. Elijah lay awake the night before, staring at the wooden slats above him. Every breath felt stolen. He whispered the names of those who didn't get this chance. Lottie, Marcus, Ruth's sister who'd been sold 2 winters back. He etched each name in his memory, the way others carved into stone. When the day came, the sun burned hotter than usual. In the fields, Elijah dropped to one knee near the irrigation ditch. A guard shouted. He didn't answer. The man came close, grumbling, whip in hand. Elijah slipped, rolled hard, and vanished into the ditch. The heat swallowed his trail. Beneath the grates, the world turned dark and wet. Rats scurried. The air stank of rot. But Elijah crawled forward. Up above, he heard music, laughter, gunshots. 200 yards in, a grate lifted. Ruth's face appeared. "Come on." He emerged covered in mud and blood, but alive. They ducked behind the barn, where Josiah waited, clutching a sack. "Your pass," he whispered, handing Elijah a folded paper marked with the seal. They moved fast. At the rear of the property was a wagon. Empty. Waiting. Ruth kissed his cheek. "You get to the line. You don't stop, no matter what." Elijah nodded. "Come with me." She smiled, sad. "Not yet. My turn comes later." And then she was gone. He lay flat under the wagon's tarp as it rattled down the road. Each bump sent fire through his ribs. Each shout from the driver made his heart stop. But he didn't breathe until the wheels slowed and a voice called, "State Patrol." He gripped the pass. Footsteps. A pause. Move on. The wagon rolled forward. Elijah wept silently. He was not free. Not yet. But he was moving. And he was not alone. Elijah didn't dare lift the tarp, not even to check the stars. The wagon rocked and groaned as it moved along the dirt road. Each jolt a fresh reminder that he was still close enough to lose everything. He gripped the forged pass so tightly that sweat softened the edges. Beside him, bundled among sacks of dried corn, was a worn cloth pouch Josiah had pressed into his hands. "If you get far enough, you'll need what's in there," he'd whispered. Inside, a knife, 3 silver coins, a map drawn in smudged charcoal, and a small leather-bound book with the spine cracked nearly in half. The book was a Bible, hollowed out to conceal a folded letter. It was addressed simply, "To the one who still runs." Elijah couldn't read it in the dark, but he pressed it against his chest like armor. The wagon came to a stop after what felt like hours. The driver, a white man with tobacco-stained fingers and tired eyes, climbed down and muttered with another voice Elijah didn't recognize. There was laughter, then footsteps around the wagon. He held his breath. One set of boots stopped near the back. "What's in the wagon?" "Just corn. Dried, going up to South Bend Market." A pause. "You check it?" Elijah's heartbeat pounded in his ears. A sigh. "Go on then." The wagon groaned again, moving forward. 2 towns later, the driver tapped twice against a wooden side. That was the signal Ruth had promised. Elijah pushed himself up and slipped out the back, his legs stiff, his mouth dry as ash. He landed hard behind a line of trees and crouched low. In the dim light, he saw the driver give him a nod, then continue on. Elijah ran. For miles, he moved with no plan, no path, only the stolen map and what Ruth had whispered to him. Look for the willow by the split stone. Listen for 3 knocks, then 1. Ask for the woman with the red ribbon. He walked at night, slept in thickets, and drank from creeks brown with mud. Hunger gnawed at his stomach until it felt like a second heartbeat. But the worst was the waiting. In a barn outside a town called Ellis Crossing, he found her. The woman with the red ribbon was older than he'd expected, with a long scar down one cheek and eyes that missed nothing. She led him inside, past rows of empty stalls, and locked the doors behind them. "You got the mark?" she asked. He showed the forged pass. She waved it away. "Not that. The real mark." He hesitated, then reached into his shirt and pulled out the triangle of blue silk, the one from the cotton sack. She smiled. "You'll stay 2 nights. We'll feed you, then you move." Her name was Natty. She was a conductor, though the word meant something different here than on any train Elijah had ever known. She gave him stew and a place to sleep in the hay. Others were there too. A woman with a child, no older than 4, a man with half a foot, and a girl whose skin was too fair to have survived slavery long without suspicion. They didn't speak much. In that place, silence was safety. On the second night, Maddie pressed a small pebble into Elijah's hand. "Hold on to it," she said. "If you see a window with a candle and that same pebble on the sill, that's your station. If you don't see both, keep walking." That night, Elijah dreamed of Philadelphia, of the courtroom, of the rusted shackles. But mostly, he dreamed of Lottie's voice calling his name, like wind through tall grass. He woke with tears on his face. By the next morning, the group was gone. Only Natty remained. "You travel alone from here," she told him. "You're ready." He wasn't sure if she meant it or simply needed him to go. Either way, he left with the pebble in one pocket and the hollowed Bible in the other. For 3 nights, he walked through Carolina woods. His feet blistered. He hid from dogs. Once, he climbed into a tree and stayed there for 10 hours while patrols passed below. When he finally reached the next station, a tiny shack on the edge of a river, the candle was lit, the pebble waiting. Inside, an old man in a preacher's coat let him in without a word. He gave Elijah a coat, a hat, and a new forged pass. This one read, "Messenger of the Lord." "You'll be my cousin, come to help with sermons," the man said. "We'll ride tomorrow. I've got kin up in Roanoke. Good people." That night, Elijah sat on a wooden bench and opened the letter from the Bible. The handwriting was cramped and shaky. "If you're reading this, you've already done what many couldn't. You've left. That's not the end. That's the middle. Keep moving. Trust sparingly. Believe fully. The road won't be kind, but it will be yours. Freedom is not a place. It's a direction." Elijah folded the letter and whispered the words again and again until sleep took him. In Roanoke, he posed as a preacher's assistant for 2 weeks. He learned how to speak slow, to listen fast, and to lie with a face like stone. More than once, he passed patrols that scanned his skin with suspicion. At night, he helped dig graves behind the chapel, shallow pits with no bodies, just space. The conductor there was a gravedigger named Bo. The graves were tunnels. One night, Elijah helped 2 women and a child climb down into one of them. He covered the dirt, marked the site with a cross, and never saw them again. That's when he started dreaming of chains again. Not on himself, but on others. On Ruth, on Josiah, on the girl with the 4-year-old. Every time he moved forward, it felt like he was leaving someone behind. By the time he reached the edge of the Mason-Dixon line, Elijah had stopped counting the days. He stood on a hill, looking northward, toward land that promised no chains. A man beside him, one of Bo's conductors, handed him a final piece of paper. It had one word: Baltimore. Elijah swallowed hard. Then he crossed. The first snow fell as Elijah stepped into Pennsylvania. It dusted the road like powdered sugar, clinging to the folds of his coat and settling in the creases of his boots. Every step he took left behind a story, one that patrols could read too easily. He walked in zigzags, dragging his feet, doubling back to muddy his trail. The man in Baltimore had told him to wait at a boarding house near Mount Joy. "They'll know your name before you speak it," he'd said. "But say nothing about where you came from." The boarding house was run by a Quaker woman named Judith, who smelled like cedarwood and honey. She wore silence like a cloak, saying little beyond, "You'll stay up in the attic 2 days, then west." The attic was cramped and cold, but Elijah was used to discomfort by now. What unsettled him was the quiet. For months, he'd lived in motion: wagons, tunnels, sermons, whispers. Now there was only stillness. And in that stillness, memories returned like ghosts. He dreamed of the auction block, the humid air of Charleston clinging to his skin, as the crowd placed silent bids with hungry eyes. He remembered the iron collar, the branding iron, the sound of chains like wind chimes in hell. And then, always, the voice of his mother whispering a name: "Elijah, don't forget who you are." He woke in the attic sweating, his breath misting in the frigid air. Judith never asked about his past, and he never offered it. Her kindness came in actions: warm bread, a basin of water, a single candle left outside the trapdoor. On the third night, a knock at the front door made Elijah freeze. Footsteps followed, then hushed voices. He heard Judith say, "No one like that here," and the door slammed shut. Minutes later, she crept to the attic. "They're watching the roads. You'll need to leave tonight," she said. Elijah didn't question her. He had learned long ago that trust was a currency more valuable than gold. Judith handed him a folded map and a bundle of food. "Follow the river west. There's a farm near Greensburg. Ask for a man named Silas. Say the name Brunswick. That's enough." Elijah tucked the map into his coat and bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered. Judith simply nodded. "You carry more than yourself, Elijah. Make it count." That night, beneath a slivered moon, Elijah slipped from the attic and into the woods. The snow muffled his footsteps, but the cold bit into his skin. Every branch creak felt like a scream. He thought of Marcus and Ruth, of the night they were taken from the cabin where they'd hidden. He thought of the fire, of the cries that never stopped. He thought of the vow he had made. "Freedom," he whispered into the trees. "For them. For me." Each step westward was defiance. Each breath was a rebellion, and each heartbeat was a drum. By morning, Elijah reached the edge of a frozen river. He broke the ice to drink and felt the sting down to his bones. Across the water, smoke rose from a chimney. He hesitated, hidden by trees, watching. Then came the voice. "You lost, boy?" Elijah turned to see a man on horseback. He was white, older, and wore a gray coat lined with fox fur. The man didn't draw his pistol, but his hand hovered near it. "Just passing through," Elijah said evenly. The man studied him. "You got papers?" Elijah shook his head. "No, sir." "Then you best keep moving." Elijah nodded and stepped back into the woods. Behind him, the rider called, West's dangerous. Lot of folks out there don't like questions. Elijah didn't reply. He'd lived with danger long enough to know that silence could save you. Or bury you. By the time Elijah reached Greensburg, his boots were split and his fingers numb. The town was little more than a cluster of buildings around a church steeple, but he moved through it like a shadow. He found Silas's farm at dusk. A weathered man with tobacco-stained teeth met him at the gate. "What do you want?" Elijah said, one word. "Brunswick." Silas blinked, then nodded once. "Barn's in the back. Don't speak to anyone. Not tonight." The barn was warm from fresh hay and livestock. Elijah collapsed onto a pile of straw and let himself cry. Not loud, just enough to remember he was alive. Later, Silas brought him stew and whispered, "We'll talk come morning." Elijah ate in silence, staring through the slats at the moon. He still didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in weeks, he wasn't running. He was waiting. And that, too, was a kind of freedom. That night, Elijah dreamed again. But it was different this time. Not of fire or chains, but of water, clear and cold, washing the blood from his hands. He stood in a field where no one chased him. No one yelled his name in hatred. In the dream, his mother stood beneath a tree, her arms open, her voice steady. "You're almost there, my son." He awoke before dawn to Silas tapping his boot. "Ride's here." Outside, a cart waited, piled with hay. A black driver nodded at Elijah. "Name's Amos." "We got a day's ride ahead." Elijah climbed into the cart. As it rattled down the frozen path, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. What he'd escaped was behind him. What he was building, what others like him were building, lay ahead. And in that direction, for the first time, there was hope. The cart jolted over the frozen ruts as Elijah clung to the side rails, hay scratching at his coat and face. Amos, the driver, kept a firm grip on the reins, eyes squinting at the horizon. The forest thinned to open plains, and the air smelled of frost, pine, and faint smoke. The smell of distant fires, of hearths, of hidden homes. "Elijah, right?" Amos asked, not turning. Elijah nodded. "I know who you are. Or at least, who you were." Brunswick was a name my grandfather whispered when he carved symbols into tree bark. "You came from the sea but never sank." Elijah didn't reply. He didn't know what to do with reverence, not when he had nearly drowned in chains. He traveled in silence most of the day. Amos spoke only once more at a fork in the road. Left leads to Ontario. Right leads to Ohio. Either way, it's a long ride. "Which is safer?" Elijah asked. Amos chuckled. "Ain't no safety. Just people with guns and people with grace. You gotta hope the latter find you first." They went left. The safe house near the border was tucked behind a chapel. It looked like a tool shed to passers-by, but below it ran a cellar carved deep into the ground. Elijah stayed there for weeks. Word spread that he could read, that he had escaped, that he had survived. And suddenly, people came. Some came to weep. Others brought food. One boy handed him a book of poetry with a broken spine. A woman named Hester arrived from Detroit, eyes hard and voice hoarse. "My son needs to know men like you exist," she said. "He's 7. Already thinks his skin is a curse." Elijah knelt and gave the boy his only keepsake, a scrap of cloth embroidered with the word free. The boy clutched it like treasure. At night, Elijah wrote, by candlelight, On the backs of ledgers and scraps of Bible pages, he recorded names, routes, faces. He drew maps of safe paths, described barking dogs in certain towns, whispered the names of sheriffs who could not be trusted. His journal grew thick with blood and hope. Others copied it. One day, a man named Paul brought a printer's block. "We can get this out," Paul said. "People need to read it. They need to know." Elijah hesitated. "They'll come for me." "They already are," Paul replied. So it was published. First in fragments, then in chapters. Letters from the Broken River, it was called. Readers wept. Some tore out pages and nailed them to church doors. The backlash came quickly. The first raid missed him by a day. The second took Paul. They found his press burned to the ground. Elijah moved again, deeper into Canada. In the town of St. Catharines, he met Mary, a schoolteacher with eyes sharp as needles. "I know who you are," she said. "But do you know what you've become?" He didn't. Not really. But he listened. Mary offered him a place in her classroom, not as a teacher, but as a witness. "You speak," she said. "They'll listen." The first time he stood before the children, Elijah's hands trembled. But then he looked at the faces, round, brown, wide-eyed. And he remembered his mother's voice. "You are not nothing." So he spoke of Charleston, of the whip, of the attic and the river, and the boy who held the word free like a shield. And the children listened. One winter evening, a student brought him a sealed letter. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "You're alive." It was Judith. She had survived. The raid on her home had come weeks after Elijah's escape. She had been beaten, jailed briefly, and then released under pressure from the local church. They couldn't prove she had helped anyone, but she had lost her job, her home, everything. Still, she wrote, "I'd do it again." Elijah wept when he read the final line. "You gave my silence meaning." Years passed. The war came, and with it, flames and rupture. Elijah watched from the north as black men donned Union blue, as shackles were broken in some places and reinforced in others. When freedom was declared, he traveled south, not to reclaim anything, but to witness. Charleston was scorched, but still breathing. The auction blocks were gone, the chains melted down, but the air still remembered. He visited the alley where he'd been captured. Nothing remained. Just bricks and dust and time. But across the street stood a new building, a school, bearing a plaque with words that stopped him cold. Founded by Elijah Brunswick, 1866, for the children of freedom. He hadn't built it. He hadn't even known, but someone had remembered. At the school's opening, he was asked to speak. He walked to the podium with a limp, a bad knee from a fall years before. The room was quiet. Then he said, "They tried to erase us, to chain our bodies and break our minds. But still we speak, still we teach, still we build. Freedom is not a door someone opens for you. It is the fire you carry in your chest. Let them try to silence us. We will teach louder." They stood to applaud, not just because of his words, but because he had lived them. Elijah Brunswick died in his sleep 10 years later, in a small cabin by a lake that never froze. They buried him with the journal pressed to his chest. On his grave were carved 4 words: He remembered, so we could.